Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and I should have made this video like a year ago. So a while back, I did a video series on how to build and install drawers, and I had a bunch of requests to do the same thing for doors, and I actually started that series last year, then things got busy, and you know how that goes. So in the first two videos, I shared how to size cabinet doors, and then I shared a video on 7 ways to build a cabinet door. So for this video, I'm finally back with part 3, which is hinges and how to install them. I'm going to break this video down into 4 parts. First, we'll talk about the 4 basic types of hinges and how to choose which one that you need. Then we'll talk about how to install the hinges to the door, then how to install the door to the cabinet, and then finally we'll talk about how to adjust the hinges for a hopefully perfect fit. So first, let's take a closer look at hinges. For this video, we're focusing on concealed hinges because that's typically what you'll be using in most cabinet and furniture projects. So there are 4 main types of concealed hinges, and they all look a little bit different, but they'll all have a cup, this part right here, that gets installed onto the cabinet door, and then a mounting plate that gets installed onto the cabinet. To be clear, this is not a comprehensive list of all available concealed hinges on the market. This is just the 4 main types that you'll find in probably 95% of your DIY and cabinet projects. To determine which of the 4 that you need to ask 2 questions. Is this for an inset or an overlay door? And is this going into a frameless or a face frame project? From there, you can select one of the 4 hinge types. Inset frameless hinge, overlay frameless hinge, inset face frame hinge, or an overlay face frame hinge. Now, usually answering these questions is pretty straightforward, but sometimes it may not be 100% clear. In some cases, doors may be inset some parts of the project and overlay other parts of the project. So to determine what kind of hinge that you need to determine whether the door is inset or overlay the part of the project that the door is mounted to. For example, this cabinet has doors that are inset the top and the bottom, but they overlay the cabinet sides. Since the hinges are mounted to the cabinet sides and the doors overlay those parts, they'll need an overlay hinge. In general, frameless cabinets and furniture don't have an additional frame on the front, like this box. Or if they do have an additional frame on the front, it's not overhanging the inside opening. For example, this cabinet has side panels installed flush to the inside of the legs. So while the legs technically frame the front, it's considered frameless because everything is flush along the inside of the opening. To be considered a face frame cabinet, the frame on the front needs to overhang the inside, like this. In this case, the frame sticks into the cabinet opening, so there's a lip on both sides. The reason why this overhang matters is because face frame hinges have a different kind of mounting plate than a frameless hinge. Frameless hinges have a long mounting plate that's designed to mount to a flush surface. But face frame hinges have a mounting plate that's designed to kind of wrap around the edge of the face frame when installed. Now, if you choose an overlay face frame hinge, you still have one more question to answer. In the cabinet door sizing video, we talked about how overlay face frame doors can have different overlay amounts. So you have to know your overlay amount when selecting your overlay face frame hinge because these come in different sizes. So if you're using a 1/2 inch overlay door, you need to select 1/2 inch overlay face frame hinges. If you want a 1 inch overlay, you need to select 1 inch overlay face frame hinges, and etc., because there are multiple overlay amount options. These hinges will have their overlay amounts written on the mounting plate. You can see this one is 1/2 and this one is 1.5 inches. 2 more quick notes before we move on to installing the hinges. Often, frameless overlay hinges are just labeled as overlay. There's not usually an overlay amount specified. Sometimes you'll see them labeled as full overlay or half overlay. Full overlay is roughly 3/4 inch, so that would give you a full overlay if you mounted it to a 3/4 inch plywood cabinet box. I assume a half overlay is half of that, but I've never bought a half overlay hinge. There's enough adjustment in regular full overlay hinges that you can use them for pretty much everything, even if you have 2 doors sharing a 3/4 inch divider panel. The second note is about the inset face frame hinges. I rarely use these. They're kind of pricey and a pain to install. So when possible, I usually use an inset frameless hinge and a spacer block, and I'll show you more of that in just a minute. To install concealed hinges to the door, you need a concealed hinge jig, a drill, and a clamp. Or if you don't want to use the concealed hinge jig, you can just use a Forstner bit because that's That's what this is. So this jig has these two adjustment knobs. Mine are pretty beat up, but these allow you to set the distance that you want the edge of your hinge cup hole from the edge of your door. And you can see the options here are 3, 4, 5, and 6 millimeter. Now, sometimes your hinges will specify the amount that you need to set this on, but I'll be honest, I usually just set this jig and leave it as is and rarely ever change it. 5 millimeter seems to work for pretty much everything that I do normally. I just noticed that I set it at 3 millimeter, and I think I did that back when I made the arched door cabinet last year, and I forgot to ever change it back, and I've been using it at 3 millimeter, and that's worked fine for pretty much everything I've built since then. Any of these settings will work for pretty much most applications. So not super critical, but these are adjustable. And basically when you adjust them, it just moves this little knob. And so when you butt it up to the cabinet door, that's what sets the distance. This jig also has a ruler across the top. So 0 is the center, and then it goes 4 inches this way and 4 inches this way. So in most cases, it doesn't really matter how far up or down the cabinet door that you install your hinge, but it is important to first take a look at your overall project and see if there's anywhere where the hinges might potentially interfere. For example, in this cabinet, there's a drawer at the top, so I made sure to place my hinges where they would be below the drawer. So if you don't have any weird obstructions, for a small to medium-sized door, typically you'll just have one hinge toward the top and one hinge toward the bottom. Typically, I'll center my hinges about 2.5 to 4 inches from the top and bottom edge. For taller or larger doors, you'll usually place one at the top, one at the bottom, and then 1 to 2 spaced out in between. Typically, these hinges are rated to hold about 10 pounds each, so 2 hinges can theoretically hold up to 20 pounds, 3, 30 pounds, etc. So if you have a really heavy door, you'll obviously need to add enough hinges to hold the weight. So once I've decided where to place my hinges, I clamp my jig onto the door and drill. Remember these knobs I talked about earlier? Those need to butt up to the edge of the door, and then I can slide it to where I'm going to install these 3 inches centered from the top edge. So I just slide it up to my 3, clamp, and drill. You only need to drill to the depth of the cup hole, so this will sit in here nice and flush. And the jig here has a stop collar on it to help you set your depth. Now you can unlock this and pull this out, and you can see the jig has 2 holes right here to let you pre-drill the holes for installing the hinges. But I'll be honest, I never use that because I don't want to have to swap drill bits once I've already got this on. So instead, I'll just use a square to line them up, or I'll just eyeball that it looks straight while I'm driving my screws. So installing the doors to the cabinet will look a little bit different depending on what type of hinge that you're using, so I'm going to go over all 4. So if you watch my cabinet door sizing video, you know that for a overlay frameless door, you have about 1/8 of an inch reveal at the top and the bottom. So I know this isn't super technical or scientific, but personally, if I'm getting ready to install an overlay frameless door, I like to just butt the edge of the door up to the front of the cabinet. Then I'll either hold it with my hand, depending on how heavy it is, or I'll prop it up on my foot until I see that the reveal here at the top is about even with the reveal at the bottom. But if you don't want to just hold your door in place or use your foot, you can also use some scrap blocks or some shims to stack up under the door to hold it in place. Craig makes this cabinet door mounting jig that works as well. So I don't use this jig very often, but it does come in handy if you're installing a whole bunch of doors. So it's got these slots on the back, and then this piece is adjustable up and down the slots to determine your overlay, and then you just clamp it to the bottom of your cabinet, and then your door will rest on that piece to help you hold your door in place while you drive the screws. Again, for small or lightweight doors, I find it easier just to hold it in place. I like to drive one screw into each hinge and then shut the door to make sure it's not way off. Then I'll go back and add the other 2 screws into each hinge. The great thing about concealed hinges is that you don't have to get them perfectly placed when you install them. They just need to be close. We can fine tune the alignment and the spacing when we get to adjusting the hinges later in the video, but for now, the door is installed. So inset frameless doors are pretty similar. This one just sits inside the cabinet when you install it instead of butting up to the front edge. Remember, with inset doors, you want an 1/8 of an inch gap around all sides, so it needs to sit into the cabinet about an 1/8 of an inch above the bottom edge. That'll give you an 1/8 of an inch gap at the bottom, and if you're sized correctly, that means you'll have an 1/8 of an inch gap at the top. You can use a shim or some kind of a little scrap block to help you get your spacing. And it should be inset the cabinet about 3/4 of an inch down here. You can just kind of eyeball it or use another 3/4 inch thick scrap block to kind of get an idea how far inset that it is. And again, I like to tack a screw in each hinge, close the door to see if anything's way off, then add the other 2 screws. So in most cases with an inset door, you'll need some kind of a stopper, either at the top or the bottom, like a magnetic catch or just a piece of scrap wood that you can tack up there to help the door actually close so that it's flush. For overlay face frame doors, the hinges fit over the face frame like this. And again, I usually just use my foot or just kind of hold the door so that the reveal or the overlay, whichever one you want to look at, is the same at the top and the bottom. Or again, you can use some scrap blocks underneath the door or use the cabinet door mounting jig. These hinges only have 1 screw to install it to the face frame, unlike the frameless hinges that have 2. Now for inset face frame hinges, these are the hardest ones to install. The reason is that this part of the hinge right here actually fits inside the edge of the face frame. So it's kind of hard to reach, it's kind of hard to see, it's kind of hard to get the drill in. So just like with my other inset door, it needs to sit up off the face frame about an 1/8 of an inch. So I'll just use this piece of scrap wood here to help me space that. And then these hinges, like the inside edge here has a little lip. So I just butt it up to the edge of the face frame here. One screw in each hinge, just make sure everything's pretty normal, and then I'll drive the other 2 screws. So there's that. Now I mentioned earlier that I try to avoid these types of hinges, so you can see here an example. On one side, I used the inset face frame hinges, but on the other side, I used inset frameless hinges and just added some scrap blocks behind the face frame that came flush to the opening. This allows me to fake a frameless cabinet, at least where the hinges will go. All of these hinges have 3 adjustments to allow you to move the door up or down, side to side, or in and out to get a perfect fit. These adjustment screws will look a little bit different depending on what type of hinge that you're using, so let's take a look at each one. On both types of frameless hinges, the adjustments look pretty similar. These screws move the door up and down, these screws move the door side to side, and these screws move the door front to back. On overlay face frame hinges, these screws move the hinge side to side, these screws move it up and down, and these move it in and out. On inset face frame hinges, these screws move the door side to side, these move up and down, and these move in and out. So what needs adjusting? That's going to vary case to case, but here are a few examples. So this door is rubbing on this side. You can see the gap over here is pretty big, but the gap over here is non-existent, and it's rubbing when I open the door. So I need to move it this way. Since the entire door needs to move over, I'm going to adjust both hinges so that it pushes the door out. So in this case, the door is crooked. It's touching here, and it's touching here, and it's touching here. So I need to bump this hinge out and pull this hinge back. Now this door is too low. The gap down here is pretty small, but the gap up here is pretty big. So I just need to bump it up a little. So this door looks pretty good as far as the gaps go, but this corner down here is sticking inside the door a little bit too far. It's not flush along the front edge. It is up here, but it's not down here. So I need to adjust this hinge to bump this corner out. And now it's flush. Now that's obviously not a comprehensive list of all the possibilities that you may run into in your projects, but I hope that it gives you a general idea of how to kind of look at what's going on with the door and figure out what you need to adjust. The more doors that you install, the easier this becomes, I promise. One final note, concealed hinges are generally designed to be used with a certain thickness of door. The door obviously can't be thinner than the hinge cup that goes inside the door, but it can't be too thick either because then there won't be enough clearance for the door to open. Generally, when using concealed hinges, the thickness of the door should be about 3/4 of an inch to maybe an inch max. So 3/4 inch plywood slab doors or doors that are framed out with like 1x material work pretty well. And with that, I think this wraps up the cabinet door series. I really hope that it's been helpful. I'll link all 4 hinges that I've used in this video in the description below, and I'll also add some additional resources for easy reference. I'll be back soon with plenty more projects to practice what we've just learned on. So if you guys are not already subscribed, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, friends, happy building.